Norms are unwritten rules. There are no laws, but still we all seem to know when norms are broken. So why do we have norms? And even more so, why do we sometimes have norms that don't seem to make sense at all? Let's get into it. So why do we have norms and what are they? Social norms are sort of unwritten rules about how to behave. There are no laws, but still everybody seems to know what the social norm is. And if you don't follow the social norm, you really stick out. So norms provide us with an expected idea of how to behave in a particular group, situation, or culture, what is right and what is wrong. But norms are entirely socially constructed. For example, it's a norm that you have eye contact with the people that you talk to. There is no law for that, but if you wouldn't do that, it really sticks out. It's pretty obvious. Or that you do not pick your nose, that you wear clothes, especially similar style of the other people around you, that you are kind to the elderly, that you open the doors for them or give them your seat, that you stop at a red light, that you pull over for an emergency vehicles, that you don't fart in public, that you flush the toilet, that you do not talk with food in your mouth, that you do not eat off another person's plates or steal their utensils, or that you do not drink alcohol during a lecture at the university. There are no laws for these things, but still we would all agree that these are things that maybe we shouldn't do. But who tells us that we shouldn't do these things? These are all socially constructed, and during other times of human existence, some of these things were not norms. You could burp or fart in public. But social norms are also omnipresent in our economic life. They really help us to maneuver it, to guide through it, like how do we interact with others. They form an important part of how work is organized or how work groups are managed. Social norms are also of importance for maintaining relations with others, with business partners. You send the odd Christmas card. You congratulate somebody to their birthday. You wish them all the best when they leave. And you say goodbye when you leave a shop. And you also say thank you to the bus driver.
Thank you so much!
Social norms are everywhere. But that doesn't explain yet why we have them. Well, a reasonable argument would be that norms make sense. There is a reason why, as a society, we decided to have that. There's a reason why you don't marry your cousin, why you don't fart in public, and why you help others to cross the street when they can't do that themselves. Maybe social norms make sense. And because of that, as a society, we implemented them. So it's a perfectly reasonable explanation to say that we do have norms because they are useful. They help us in one way or the other. And they could be useful to the society at large, and actually this would be a functionalist point of view. There's a function that it fulfills, and because of that, norms exist. Or if you're a fan of conflict theory, you could say norms are useful to the dominant groups, to the people in charge, to the people in power. And because of that, norms got established and get maintained. Or you could take a utilitarian point of view. And from that perspective, norms are useful to those who enforce it. So that makes sense, but it doesn't explain the whole thing. So why then do we have unpopular norms that do not seem to make any sense? And let me talk about some extreme examples in this context. So, for example, in China, it used to be a norm of foot binding. So young girls, their feet would be wrapped around and with tape wrapped around for years so that the foot would actually deform. It's torture. Nowadays it's forbidden, but it used to be a norm. People would do that to their kids. Why would they do that? Or another norm that doesn't make any sense, that's female circumcision in Africa. Why does it happen? There's no apparent benefit to it. There are lots of other social norms that don't make any sense, but still we have them. So how do they come about and how do they get maintained? Well, one starting point for that is that humans are group-oriented. We are largely influenced by and conform to peer norms. We'll follow what other people do. Funny story, I remember when I first came to Ireland, I got into the bus, and in my German way, I just got into the bus. And after a while, I realized that people were looking at me in a weird way. And why was that? Well, because everybody said thank you to the bus driver, but I didn't.
Thank you so much!
I wasn't used to that. You wouldn't do that in Germany or in many other countries in the world. But in Ireland, you do. So I started to say thank you to the bus driver. So it's not just yawns, laughter, or disorder that spread, but norms as well. Well, there could be herding. And herding refers to this phenomena where you think that, well, if so many other people do it, they can't be wrong. But we also have pluralistic ignorance. And pluralistic ignorance is basically an incorrect assessment of what you think what the majority wants. So herd behavior is highly dependent on the behavior of early movers, and they exert a disproportionate influence on the future direction. Like people who start something, they start wearing bow ties during a lecture, and then other people follow, and ultimately, or eventually, and probably not, a norm establishes that you should wear a bow tie during a lecture.
This one comes, the slightly longer one comes over the top. Now here's the key. I'm holding an opening here with these fingers. That's the key.
People follow the crowd and are led to decisions that are sometimes inconsistent or even contradictory to what they privately believe. And never underestimate the power of peer pressure and peer norms. If all your friends do something and behave in a certain way and establish a certain norm, it's really hard for you to go against that, even when you privately think that it doesn't make any sense or that maybe you shouldn't. The idea really is that when you have a herd of people doing something, well, so many others cannot be wrong. And there's a paper by Peter Hedstrom where he talks about that in the context of traffic jams. Imagine you're driving a car and the car in front of you slows down. What are you going to do? Well, chances are you hit the brakes and you slow down as well, because you might think maybe those cars in front of me see something that I do not. So maybe there is an accident further down the road or a construction site and I better slow down. So you do it because you think that so many others cannot be wrong. It's one of my favorite observations, and I hope and I'm sure we'll get there again and enjoy it, when you are at the airport and you sit at the gate. And your flight is not until another hour or so. And everybody's sitting there, everybody's chilling. I just got my coffee and I listen to my music. I'm just having a good time. And then there's this one dude coming along who just walks by everybody who is happily sitting there and stands at the gate and forms a queue. And you all know what happens next. So within a minute or two, people jump up and they run behind that guy and form that queue. And usually I'm sitting there, I observe the whole thing. I'm a sociologist after all. And it goes on for 5 minutes, and then everybody who was happily sitting before now stands in the queue. And I wonder what the hell did just happen, especially because it still takes another half an hour until the gate opens. And you know what? Sometimes even I stand up, even though the queue has formed. It doesn't make any sense for me anymore to have a certain position in the queue. Besides, I don't really care about a certain position in the queue anyway, because I have a seat in the plane with a seat number on it. But still, I stand up and I join the queue. Why do I do that? That's herding behavior. Let's talk about another mechanism that could be at play here, and that's what we call pluralistic ignorance. Pluralistic ignorance basically refers to the situation where you think the majority wants something, but in fact the majority doesn't. So it's like a wrong or false assessment of what the majority wants, and based on that you behave in a certain way. Not because the majority wants that, but because you think the majority wants that. And people then suppress their dissent and copy the behavior of others who are incorrectly assumed to represent the majority. So it's all about false assessment of what the majority wants. And the classic example in this case is the time of prohibition. That is when alcohol was banned. You were not allowed to buy alcohol in shops or in pubs. And during that time, in the US, most people thought that others were for it, even though in reality, most people were against it, including those who were most vocal about the introduction of prohibition. And we can still observe this with respect to drinking today. Perkins and Craig conducted a study on drinking and perceived norms about drinking. It's a web-based survey amongst schools in middle and high schools in the US, and the actual use of alcohol in middle schools was 7%. But the students thought that the use of alcohol is much higher. It's 23%. And the same thing in high schools, where the actual use in high school of alcohol was 29%, or 29% of the people drank alcohol, while in fact the students thought that 60% of the people drink alcohol. That's alcohol-free. And you observe that in other important areas, especially for young adults as well. For example, at what age do people have sex for the first time? Or how many people in a cohort do take drugs? There are huge differences in what is actually true and in what people think or what people's perceptions are about these things. Our behavior is heavily influenced by our perceptions of what others think and do. Oftentimes you do not know how many of your friends drink alcohol, or when they had sex for the first time, or whether they experimented with drugs. But for your own behavior, that doesn't matter. What matters is the perception of these behaviors that you have. Funny story that really is why I became a sociologist. I studied computer science and business before. I got a degree in that. But I always thought about society, and I didn't really know what that was. So I started writing down ideas, and this is the very first book where I wrote down ideas, and by now I have over 15 of those. And the very first idea in the very first notebook on society that I started was something that it doesn't really make a difference if something is really true or not. As long as people believe in it, it's the same in its consequences. So I thought I had a great idea. I developed that idea and wrote pages about it, only to find out that, first of all, this was sociology. Yay! But then also that somebody already had that idea 80 years ago. There was a guy called William I. Thomas. He was a professor in sociology at Chicago. Here it is. It is a real thing. It's called Thomas' theorem. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. So I was late by around 80 years, but still I thought, it's not a bad idea. And it has the right name. So maybe I should become a sociologist. And that's what I did. And here I am. And the thing that gets interesting for us now is that the perceptions that we have of what others think and do, that these perceptions are not always right. In fact, they are often inaccurate. We think that people think something, but in fact they do not. But it still affects what we do. So we think that we know what others think, but we do not. So the perceptions that we have of how others think or what they do, they are often inaccurate. But it still affects our behavior because that is real for us. So why would we misperceive norms? Well, there's a natural tendency to generalize observed behaviors. So a couple of your friends maybe do something and then you generalize from that and think, well, that's just the norm. It's completely accepted and completely fine. Well, in fact, it might not be. Oftentimes we misperceive something because it's portrayed to us in a certain way. For example, through entertainment or advertisement. And when you look at advertisement, everybody has the perfect body, everybody is well trained and in perfect shape, and and they're healthy and whatnot. And you think, what's wrong with me? I don't fit into that. I seem to be less fit, I seem to be less beautiful or more ugly than the people portrayed in the media. And you're not ugly, you're beautiful. But what is being portrayed by social media to you is not a representation of the real world. And often we cannot grasp that, and especially vulnerable groups struggle with that. Oftentimes young kids, teenagers, or even some of you might not have the confidence to be who you are, because you think that you're supposed to be in another way, and in the way how those fit, healthy, shiny-looking influencers present themselves. But in no way are those influencers a good reflection of society. So we have an idea now about how norms come about and also why they might get introduced, even when they don't make sense or when they are based on the wrong assumptions. But why would these norms persist when they don't make sense? Shouldn't people eventually realize and change things? Shouldn't they just go away? Because one could argue that norms that don't make sense are unstable. And with unstable we mean that people would realize that they are wrong, or that they don't lead to any benefit, or that they're not useful and so on. So they are shaky. So these norms are based on shaky grounds because you could easily knock them over. They are unstable when they don't make any sense. So one interesting suggestion here is that norms, especially unstable norms, survive. They still exist because these norms are enforced. So somebody tells you what to do. So I didn't want to eat the spinach, but I had to. Somebody enforced that. So enforcement could be a mechanism of why norms survive, even though they do not make any sense. But then the next question, and that's a very interesting one, is why would people enforce a norm that doesn't make any sense? So it is easy to explain why people comply with unpopular norms, maybe because they fear social sanctions. Somebody enforces that norm, and if you don't follow that norm, you get punished for it, you get sanctioned. And it is also easy to explain why some people pressure others to behave in a certain way or enforce a norm when they like that norm or when they believe in it themselves. But why would some people pressure others to follow a certain norm even when they think themselves that it doesn't make any sense? And now we're talking about the false enforcement of norms, and in particular we'll talk more about the emperor's dilemma. It's a story, come back to that. But the basic story is the following. Let's imagine you go to a museum and you look at the painting and, this is what you see. And you think, I don't really get it. What the hell is going on here? But you're there not just by yourself, but maybe with a friend or with somebody else, and you look at them. And you see that they are struggling as well. And then some people actually start to enforce a norm by saying, don't you see it? Don't you get it? This is art. Even though, personally themselves, they might not get it. And believe it or not, it's something that takes place. And by doing that, you can show to others that, well, you have this grand understanding of modern art, while they might not, which puts you in a higher status category. And here's a historical example for the same phenomena. Let's talk about witch hunts. Like back in the days, people, mostly women, were accused of being a witch and then they were burnt. And there is documentation that people accused others of being a witch even though they didn't believe in witchcraft. But they still went along with their accusation. It's a fascinating area of research because it actually might have made sense for people to do that. Because by doing that, they could show to others that they really believe in the teachings of the church. So in a way, accusing somebody of witchcraft was like the most sincere way of showing that you are not a witch yourself, even though you might have never believed in witchcraft in the first instance. But again, it doesn't matter what you think. As long as you think that other people believe in witchcraft, it does make sense for you to show a signal, a sign, that you are not a witch. And which better sign could you choose than accusing somebody else of being a witch and believing in witchcraft yourself? Okay, so here are other examples of compliance with and then the enforcement of privately unpopular norms. So this is a situation where you comply with something, but not only that, but then you also enforce it. So you make sure that others also do it, even though you privately do not believe in it. An example could be the exposure of the politically incorrect by the righteously indignant, who thereby affirm their own moral integrity. Or, like gossiping about a social faux pas by snobs who are anxious to affirm their own cultural sophistication.
I'm not posh, I love kebabs!
It's very funny, you can even see this in sociology, Like you talk to a friend who read an article and didn't get it, and then you talk down to that friend and say, didn't you get it? It was beautiful theory, general systems theory, don't you get it? You must be stupid. And by saying that, you could credibly, but falsely show that you are a proper sociologist, while the others that don't get it are not.
What the fuck?
Or here's another one, like the public adoration of a bully by a fearful schoolboy, who does not want to become the next victim. So why does someone adore the bully, even though they don't want to get bullied? So false enforcement is the public enforcement of a norm that people privately oppose. And let's come back to our college freshmen. So they might worry about social acceptance. And because of that, they might be tempted to drink, and to celebrate drinking and appear to be cool. And sometimes it doesn't stop there. Sometimes it goes further on to drugs and so on, that people use drugs because they want to appear cool in the eyes of other people, even though they really know that it is wrong or that it's not that good for them. However, you must not appear to be motivated by this goal, because otherwise people would look through you. You would not get accepted by the group if the group would realize that you are only drinking in order to appear cool. You would be a poser. It wouldn't be real. People wouldn't believe you. But how can you make people believe you? Well, a reasonable strategy is not just to party, but then also to express the belief that others should do that too. Getting others involved into drinking or taking drugs or doing other things that you shouldn't do, in order to show your sincerity of that behavior to the others, even though you know it is wrong. And if that happens in the context of drinking, like people enforce the drinking in others to appear cooler themselves and to be credible in that, that adds to social pressure and leads others like them to then join in. And a main reason why people enforce it might not be because they truly believe in it, but because it's actually a good strategy to show your sincerity to it and that you are not a poser who just wants to be cool. Anyway, so much about social norms. They're fascinating, they're all around us, and they drive our life in more ways than you think. Social norms are one of the most socially constructed things. Somehow we seem to get to an agreement what we are supposed to do, even though there is no law, there is no rule. And interestingly, we even have norms that don't make sense, but they're still there. One explanation for that is that norms get enforced. But that brings in the next question. Why would people enforce a norm that doesn't make any sense, that is unpopular, and that they do not believe in themselves? And that's what we're going to talk about next time. Take care.
Bill Nye here on how to tie a bow tie. I've got it around my neck, I've got it under the collar. You tie an overhand knot, one side over the other. Then I recommend you wiggle, you adjust, till one side is slightly longer than the other. Just slightly, a seam width. And you like to use this side here because I'm right-handed. The slightly longer one comes over the top. Now here's the key. I'm holding an opening here with these fingers. That's the key. Come up from underneath and poke the middle of this one back through, creating a loop. Or if you want to go nautical on me, a bight, a B-I-G-H-T. But there you are. Now we must dress the knot. This is true whether you're a sailor or a bow tie wearer. We are dressing the knot. Now with a mirror, this is a lot easier, but I put in some hours. If you fold these two forward, you can feel it, that it's even. Check it out. See, looking sharp is not rocket science.